Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're doing a bit of a double feature, as we're covering two games which are extremely similar to each other, since one of them is a sequel using the exact same game engine. Those games being Desert Strike and its sequel, Jungle Strike. At first glance, these might look like action-focused games, but surprisingly, there's a lot more simulation aspects than you might expect. I mean, the gameplay is primarily action, but you have multiple mission objectives per map, and if you go in guns blazing, you're just going to get shot out of the sky before you can make any real progress. It's also kind of interesting seeing these games running in DOS, given that they got their start on game consoles, notably the Sega Genesis, aka Mega Drive, the Sega Master System, and the Super Nintendo. Curiously, the console versions of these games actually have different graphics in a lot of places, despite being virtually identical in terms of gameplay, which, given that consoles had tighter restrictions on colors than VGA graphics cards, kind of makes me wonder why the effort was made to change any of those graphics at all for the DOS port. Regardless, these games are fun, but very challenging, especially given that it often takes up to a half hour to clear all of the mission objectives on a map, meaning if you run out of lives before you're done, you've got to do the entire thing over again. And given that there's limited resources for restocking ammo and refueling, sometimes you can see your demise coming from a mile away and have to make a judgment call as to whether to try for a win anyways, or restart sooner rather than burning 10 minutes and being forced to restart later. Thankfully, there's a password system and unlimited continues, so no worries there. Both Desert Strike and Jungle Strike are very curious in that they're two of the extremely few titles developed by Electronic Arts, but not published by them, with publishing duties instead handled by Gremlin Interactive. Now, the console versions of the game were published by EA, so I'm not entirely sure why they would hand off publishing duties for the PC ports to someone else, especially given that EA was no stranger to the PC gaming market. In any case, the DOS port of Desert Strike landed in 1994, and the DOS port of Jungle Strike 1 year later in 1995, and they're both best described as one-player action/simulation games. Now, Desert Strike only supports one graphics mode, VGA 320 by 200 in 256 colors. However, much to my surprise, the CD-ROM version of Jungle Strike has a special high-color 640 by 480 SVGA mode for its FMV cutscenes, as in more than 256 colors. The best I can tell, the FMVs are encoded with a 15-bit color scheme, but still, it's extremely unusual to see a DOS game utilizing high color or true color graphics, especially given the kind of hardware needed to make that work at the time. As for audio, it's much more basic, supporting the AdLib card, a couple Roland devices, and Sound Blaster cards. As for its current release date, both games are still commercial and, as far as I can tell, haven't yet been released on digital storefronts, thus physical copies are the way to go. And, as expected, this game is extremely easy to find and dirt cheap if you don't want any of the computer-based ports, like the DOS or Amiga versions. As soon as you limit your search to the DOS copies, the prices go up and the results get thinned out considerably. Though best I can tell, the typical going rate at the moment for either game on CD-ROM is about $5 loose and $15 to $20 complete in box, with the floppy disk versions of both games potentially going for a little more depending on condition. There's also various compilations to look out for too, in case you'd prefer to get the game that way, such as the EA Replay Collection for the PSP, which has both of these games, or there's also a combo CD with both games, which is the copy I have and why I'm able to cover both in the same video. Regardless, apart from graphical differences and the lack of FMVs in the non-CD versions of the game, there are no gameplay differences, so if all you want to do is play the game, then really any port will do the trick, and there's plenty to choose from.
You told me your forces could protect my plutonium, and one pilot steals most of it back.
It's beyond explaining.
So these games do actually have a story to them, but it's nothing remarkable in either case. The first game, Desert Strike, centers around a self-proclaimed General Kill Baba, who's threatening to take over the world with a nuclear arsenal, drawing notable parallels to the real Gulf War, and stirring up some controversy on that front. While the second game, Jungle Strike, follows Kilbaba's son, who's enlisted the help of a drug lord by the name of Carlos Ortega to finish what his father started. And I should say, though, the story in both games is half-baked at best, but it seems the developers knew they were writing tripe, as some of the writing can't even remotely be taken seriously, even though it's delivered as such. I should also point out that I'm doing a bit of editing magic to make the FMV cutscenes from Jungle Strike more bearable. This is what they actually look like, interlaced and letterboxed, an unpleasant combination on the best of days. Desert Strike, on the other hand, uses more traditional sprites and backgrounds with raw text to explain what's going on. When you launch either game, you're immediately prepped to start on the first level with the least useful co-pilot automatically chosen. Now, using passwords, you can update your status at any time to change what level you're on and what co-pilots you've rescued, as not every co-pilot can be chosen from the outset, and anytime you fail a level, you come right back here as though you never even made the attempt. As such, you always start each level with 3 lives, no matter how many you ended the previous level with. When selecting a co-pilot, you have several to choose from, some of whom are locked from the outset. Now, your co-pilot selection mostly determines 3 things: how precise you have to be with the winch or ladder to pick up equipment and people, how rapidly your main guns will be fired, and how far away a target can be before your guns will reliably lock onto them. As you might expect, the missing co-pilots, once rescued, are generally much better at all of these skills, whereas the co-pilots you start with have them balanced to some degree. And before you actually begin playing a level, you're given a briefing, and something you'll notice right away is that you have lots of mission objectives in each campaign. Now, for the most part, these objectives are usually not very tricky, but occasionally they can have failure states, and if you attempt to perform missions out of order, you're liable to trigger an alert zone, whereby all enemies will get a serious boost to their offensive power until you get out of the zone that's being protected by these prior mission targets. Now, if you do make a snafu and screw up a mission royally, you'll get a message telling you to go back to base, and you'll then have to restart, the same as if you ran out of lives. The choppers you fly in Desert Strike and Jungle Strike are actually slightly different from each other. Now, they both carry the same armaments, they just have different stats. The chopper in Desert Strike has a maximum of 600 armor points and can carry 8 Hellfire missiles, 38 Hydra rockets, and 1,178 rounds of ammunition for its chain gun. Whereas the chopper in Jungle Strike has a maximum of 1,000 armor points and carries up to 9 Hellfire missiles, 60 Hydra rockets, but only 1,000 rounds of chain gun ammo. Now, the Hydra rockets are exactly 5 times stronger than your chain gun, while Hellfire missiles are 20 times stronger than the chain gun. The Hydras are best used when you need to take out something quickly to avoid taking too much damage, while Hellfires are best used to take out a powerful target immediately before it gets a chance to fire back. One thing you'll be doing frequently as you play through a campaign is checking your status screen, which provides a map of the area and allows you to cycle through all known targets, with the ability to look up additional information about them as well. Now, this includes power-ups, provided a particular kind of power-up was on the map to start with. But what I mean by that is that some maps don't have full armor restoring power-ups anywhere, but they can still technically appear when you destroy certain units or buildings, and thus if one does, but there weren't any on the map to begin with, then it's not possible to cycle to them on the map to see where they are, meaning you'll have to make a mental note of where they were to come back to later if you don't need one right away. The controls are responsive and very simple. They take a bit of practice to get used to. You have controls for moving forward and backward, rotating side to side, and jinking, which is effectively a strafe key. Now also, instead of having to select weapons to fire, you have 3 fire buttons, one for each weapon, which means you can fire multiple weapons at a time when the situation calls for as much firepower as you've got. The real trick, though, is that your helicopter doesn't accelerate on a dime, it needs a moment. Thus, the fastest maneuvers you can perform are any which take advantage of any momentum you already have. For instance, if you turn clockwise, this will build up momentum to the chopper's right side. Thus, following up with a right jink will work a lot better than trying to follow up with a left jink. And keeping your momentum is the best way to dodge attacks here, given that most enemies have just as good a firing range as you do, sometimes better. To that end, the best way to approach your mission objectives is carefully. Get close to your target, then slow it down so you can pick off targets around a perimeter first before trying to go deeper in towards your intended objective. Actually, even once you reach your objective, be on your guard, because one thing the game loves to do is spawn new enemies in response to clearing objectives. Now, thankfully, none of this is random. The enemies already on the map are the only enemies there will be at first, and any enemies which spawn after the fact are set to spawn when certain circumstances occur. Thus, it's often a good idea to deal with enemy targets when you see them, even if you don't immediately need to, just so it doesn't become a problem in the future. Fairly quickly, though, you're going to start running yourself down. Now, resupplying your ammo is fairly obvious, just fly over an ammo crate to winch it up. But fuel and armor is not as obvious. I mean, with fuel, yeah, just winch up some fuel drums, but what I find weird is that this is the only way to get fuel. Landing at a friendly landing pad doesn't do it, even though you'd think it would. Thus, it is very possible to run out of fuel during a mission with no recourse. So you have to be as efficient as you can in terms of deciding which targets to deal with in what order when you have the option. Restoring armor, on the other hand, is quite the interesting process. Basically, during missions, you're likely to rescue hostages or take prisoners. Now, each person you bring up into your chopper equates to 100 points of armor. A little more during the very first campaign in both games. But to get this armor, you have to drop them off in a landing zone. Plus, your chopper can only carry 6 extra people at a time. The reasoning as to why this equates to armor is that each person disembarking gives the crew in the landing zone time to fix your armor up, which just seems odd to me as to why you can't just land anytime you want to get an armor refill, but whatever, video game logic is weird. Once all objectives are completed, you're still not quite done, as you have to make it back to the launch pad you started the mission from to end the mission, which is usually a temporary base, but it'll sometimes be a frigate or other friendly built location. Afterwards, you'll get a debriefing, which runs through all of the points you scored or lost over the course of the mission, as well as a password to continue from where you left off. And when you clear past the debriefing, you go back to the main menu, and you'll see the button for starting the campaign will have advanced to the next campaign. Now, Desert Strike originally had 4 campaigns, while Jungle Strike had 8, but I believe the CD-ROM versions of the games have bonus campaigns, though I wasn't able to get far enough to confirm this. Jungle Strike also has a particular feature which is pretty interesting in that you have more than just a helicopter to pilot, as you'll also take command of a hovercraft, an F-117A stealth fighter, and a Special Forces assault cycle, which is effectively just a heavily armed motorcycle. Well, they all have very similar controls, so the weapons do differ slightly, with the hovercraft and motorcycle getting mines in place of the Hellfire missiles, which you drop in place and which then explode when an enemy gets too close. But these mines are nearly useless, given that they don't last long once you place them. The F-117A also has unlimited ammunition and fuel, given that it's impossible to bring it to a stop. Actually, this brings up one very pertinent issue I ran into very early on in Jungle Strike, which I thought was going to derail my entire ability to play this game. And normally, when you're in the hovercraft, to pick stuff up, you just run into it at a low speed. If you're going too fast, you'll bonk it and potentially destroy it. Well, I was having this issue where I was bonking stuff and destroying it when moving really slow. It made absolutely no sense, and given that there's a mission objective here requiring you to pick up crates of plutonium with only 1 or 2 extras to spare, it was really freaking important to figure out if there was something I was doing wrong or if this bug was just completely random. Turns out, the bug is not random. It has to do with a glitch in how the hitboxes are being calculated when turning the hovercraft at particular angles. Thus, certain angles can trigger the bug, while certain angles never will. Notably, any perfect cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, will not trigger the bug. So if you intend to pick up an item with the hovercraft, get your angle perfectly aligned as such, hold down the strafing control so you won't turn no matter what, and then pick up what you intend to pick up. If you fail to do this, you're liable to destroy all kinds of things you need to survive, or even to win. Also, these quote-unquote night missions are just brutal. It's basically just playing the game with the screen brightness turned way the heck down, and is not fun in the slightest. Really don't know how anyone thought playing the game like this would be a good idea. Overall, Desert Strike and Jungle Strike are fun games with minor flaws which can be worked around, and some seriously challenging gameplay without being excessively difficult. Now, each campaign is fairly long without a break or saves, so there's definitely a frustration factor if you're still new to the game and are just barely not making it to the end. Still, as far as isometric action games are concerned, this one plays surprisingly well, and is definitely worth checking out if you like your action games to be much more dynamic than just shoot to win. This is definitely more action than sim though, so if you're looking for a much more in-depth simulation with lots of equipment to try out and such, this isn't the game you're looking for. So, even though these games have a frame rate cap, one thing I discovered while testing things out is that the AI performs worse when the frame rate drops. So, if you're having difficulty with the game and are diverse to having a reduced frame rate, you can try turning the cycles count way down. Otherwise, I recommend a fixed cycles count of 20,000, mostly for the sake of running the high color FMV cutscenes. Though the gameplay itself doesn't technically need that many cycles to run fine, though you definitely need to be using a fixed cycles count. Also, one very important thing to point out is that the installer for the CD-ROM version of Jungle Strike does a CD speed test before properly installing everything, but this speed test hangs under the current stable build of DOSBox, version 0.74-3. So you need to use an alternate build like DOSBox ECE or DOSBox X to install the game initially, and then it should run fine regardless of which build of DOSBox you're using. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games, but before I go, I need to talk about a new schedule for ADG videos effective immediately. Because of my ongoing medical issues, I've decided the best way to ensure that content goes out regularly and on time is to change to a bi-weekly schedule, whereby there will be a new episode of ADG every other Saturday. This way, I can keep a buffer and use that buffer to prevent further delays, plus it gives me more time to focus on my game dev efforts when I end up ahead of schedule. I'm also adding November back into the mix, so the only month I'll be taking off from ADG in its entirety will be December. Also, there'll be fewer pro and mod episodes going forwards. I do intend to still make them, they just won't be as frequent. Thus, to that end, the next ADG will be another review, episode 287, debuting Saturday, July 17th, where we're going to be looking at a game with one of the strangest names I've seen in a while, giving impressions of both intergalactic combat and birds. Yeah, not really sure what to expect with this one, so be sure to tune in a couple Saturdays from now so that we may all bask in this game's oddities together. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to everyone supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small selection of you guys.